I'm your host, James Fletcher. It's Thanksgiving. Thankful for everyone who listens to this podcast each week. Appreciate all of you for following my work, whether it's my writing, the podcasts that I do, just generally my career. It means the world to me. And now, as we get into the episode, we've got so much to talk about today. Really going to end up being a jam-packed episode. Yes, it's Thanksgiving. I thought about whether or not we should do an episode today, when we should put it out. And as the week went on, as more and more of these games were played, it became very clear that I just had to record an episode this week. There was too much to talk about, too many games that matter to college basketball. It is feast week after all. And really, we have seen the landscape of the sport kind of shift into place. We know some of the narratives that we're going to be following for the rest of the season. And so now it's time to get into what some of those are. We're going to start out talking about the Maui Invitational. Then we will take a little bit of a left turn and talk about Kansas and Duke, their matchup. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Players Era Festival, what we've seen so far in the second segment. Any other loose games that are floating around out there. And then in the third segment, we'll give you the games of the week. But I do want to start off with this Maui Invitational and everything that we saw come out of it. We'll start now with UConn, because I think that ends up somehow being the biggest story out of this, despite them finishing dead last in the tournament. It starts with a loss against Memphis. They go to overtime against the Tigers. Memphis really should have put that game away in regulation. They messed around with the ball a little bit, didn't handle it well, end up going to overtime. They pull it out there. But Dan Hurley ends up having quite the interaction with an official. There's different interpretations of what he had said, both earlier in the game and when he was ejected. But clearly he crossed the line. Ref gives him a technical. And I've heard some people try to defend it, saying, well, he's doing that the whole game. And yes, he was very animated that whole game. He's very animated most of the time on the sideline. But there is a certain line that gets crossed. And there's also a threshold where if the official, especially if he had said that's enough, and he says one more word, that's kind of where the line is. And you can't fault the official there. It's not his fault that he got the technical. I mean, it's clearly what he did was worthy of a technical. And clearly something snapped to change the referee's mind that he needed to be given a technical foul. So no issue with the foul that was called there. That helps Memphis stretch it from a one-possession game to a two-possession game. Inexcusable from Dan Hurley. I mean, look, we see great coaches make mistakes sometimes. And we know that Dan Hurley has some anger issues on the sideline. It's something that he's gone to therapy for. It seems to have worked over the past season. You saw it not come up nearly as often as a story as it had in some of the past. So whatever the case was, in Maui, though, it flipped because he didn't take responsibility for putting his team down two possessions after the game. In fact, he doubled down and said it was the referee's fault that they lost that game. Look, were there a couple of calls that I thought could have gone either way? Sure. But that's basketball. That's all sports in general. There's always going to be one or two calls that you feel like are against your team. You probably get one or two calls throughout the game too. Sometimes it doesn't end up even. I didn't watch that game and think the referees decided it against UConn for sure. Well, then he comes back out in the next game and again blames the officials for UConn losing, moving to 0-2 in the tournament against Colorado, a team that I am not high on. I've made it clear, like, I'm higher on them now because they were competitive against Michigan State. I thought, of course, they beat UConn, but they're still not a team that I think is going to be an NCAA tournament caliber Big 12 team. And yet they beat UConn. And again, Dan Hurley blames the refs as if the referees have any reason to favor Colorado against, that's the thing. It's Colorado and Memphis. Like, you make this argument against Kansas, Duke, Kentucky, and a certain portion of the population is just going to believe you. They're going to say, yeah, the Blue Bloods. Yeah, they get everything. It's Memphis and Colorado. What? You're the back-to-back reigning champions. There's no reason to call a game against you to favor those two teams. It doesn't add up at all. And he's creating this like us against them mentality. And you think maybe that's going to spark something. Maybe they will just go out there and it's them against the world. And then they get blown out by Dayton. Dayton, another team that I was impressed with, despite them going to the 7th place game, but 0-3 in Maui. There is a real level of concern for UConn because it's not just Dan Hurley losing it on the bench. Teams are hunting Aiden Mahaney. And I liked Aiden Mahaney at St. Mary's, but it's clear that what he was at St. Mary's and what he is at UConn are completely different things. At St. Mary's, he was the offensive kind of playmaker. And he had, I guess, a different level of competition, even though St. Mary's plays big games. But wow. I mean, he cannot play defense right now. I mean, teams are hunting him every time down the floor. They are looking for the matchup and just giving it to whoever he's guarding. And he's getting beat pretty much every time. That's something that they have to figure out. And then the centers in foul trouble all weekend, really. Just not a good look there. I thought that they struggled to really find Caravan. And at times, McNeely, those guys got hot at different points during the weekend, but it was not a consistent thing. And with shooters like that, with guys who are the type of offensive playmakers that are offensive players that they are, there has to be a consistent flow. And really, I thought the real bright spot was solo ball, but it just wasn't enough. I'm not sold on this UConn team anymore being at the top of this sport. They have plenty of time to get it right, to find the right mixture of these players, to rebound, to compose themselves, but they've got a long way to go to get there. I'm not going to say they can't get there, but they're not there right now. That's for sure. They are not at the top of college basketball as we stand here today. The team that beat them in the first round, though, Memphis, they go on to the championship game. And I think it completely changes how we view Penny Hardaway's group in Memphis. They go from a team that was in wait-and-see mode, 100% in wait-and-see mode. You know, the coaches didn't even pick them to win the AAC. I thought it was disrespectful, but I understood it because Memphis hasn't won the AAC every year, especially without Houston there. Last year, Memphis should have run away with the conference, and they just didn't. And so the voters went with UAB, which proved to be kind of a wild decision. UAB is not off to the greatest start. Memphis is clearly the best team in the AAC. Also, a special shout out to Wichita State, who is undefeated right now and looks like a real contender in the AAC. They're going to be up near the top of those conference standings as well. Paul Mills has that program back on track. But back to Memphis. Penny Hardaway has the right combination here. PJ Haggerty is the type of player that you're either going to love him or hate him because he is the James Harden-esque, Trae Young-esque. I mean, he's foul hunting. There's no other way to say it. He's looking to draw fouls. But he gets to the free throw line and he converts. And then you pair him with a guy, Tyrese Hunter, who is a good offensive guard, really good on the defensive end. He's been locked in there. And that backcourt is extremely, extremely versatile. You can beat a lot of different teams with that backcourt. Dane Danger and Musa Cisse, the offense, defense coming in and out at center. And the wings are shooting threes. Look, they're knocking them down. There's no question about it. This Memphis team is about best case scenario so far of what you could have expected. They beat Michigan State after they beat UConn. I think they've got to be in the top 15, regardless of the fact that they lost in the championship. And yes, they were down 20 at some points against Auburn. They brought it back to 14, made it a respectable loss. I think that one will age pretty well because I do believe that Auburn, as we talk about them now, has a real case right beside Kansas as the best team in the country today. I think that this Auburn team, nobody's resume is better. They've beat Houston. They've beat Memphis. They beat Iowa State. I mean, they have rolled through here, beat North Carolina as well. So this Auburn team is right there. I don't think they'll pass Kansas in the rankings because Kansas knocked off Duke after Cooper Flag again had a couple turnover issues late. Cone Knipple struggled with turnovers late. They ran a just puzzling play at the end of regulation there where I think sometimes these coaches, especially the former players who were known for their brains, their IQ, and I don't say this I don't mean this to like disparage that group of coaches. They're a great group of coaches and they're doing amazing work right now. But there's quite a few of them out there who, I mean, their whole thing is just like how cerebral they are. And sometimes I think when they run the end of game out of bounds play, sometimes it gets the better of them where they just draw up too much. I mean, sprinting down the court and then no real action to get anyone the ball. They end up clearly going to option at least 3 on the play, which was just give it to Malawak and let somebody come get the ball from him. The ball doesn't get to Cooper Flag at all during the play. And you end up with a guy who hasn't hit a 3 all game trying for another one and missing. Not how you want to end the game if you're Duke. Kansas, though, they get away with it. Hunter Dickinson, come on, can't be kicking people. He's a guy who, when he did it, I don't think there was a ton of surprise among college basketball fans that it happened. It's a reputation you definitely want to avoid, and I think it's important for him to stay out of those situations moving forward to preserve his reputation, because we saw it with Grayson Allen. I mean, it doesn't matter how much you talk about who you are, what kind of player you want to be. If it keeps happening, you're going to develop that reputation and it's going to stick for a while. I mean, Grayson Allen's still perceived that way, even though he's been in the NBA without really any incident in years now at that level. But back to Auburn here, because I want to finish on this point. Auburn is right up there at the top of college basketball. Janai Broome is a real front runner. I said Ryan Kalkbrenner a couple weeks ago was right up there at the top and looked like he was going to contend. Well, since Ashworth went out, Creighton has plummeted, and teams are just triple teaming Kalkbrenner, and he cannot get the ball, can't get shots up. It's been ugly. I'm not saying he can't get back to it. I think he definitely can with Ashworth back at point guard, but right now it's just not there. Janai Broome, on the other hand, is killing it. I mean, there was talk that he was going to shoot from the perimeter, and you never know how that's going to go, even if he's shooting them well in the offseason. Plenty of guys have talked about how much they've been shooting the 3 in the offseason, and it just doesn't translate. But for Broome, it seems to have translated at least well enough that you've got to respect it. And you look at his versatility on defense and then the rim protection that he brings, which has always been there. You add that with just more power on offense. I think he's more aggressive at times. And then that perimeter shot, I mean, he is a versatile big, and he has been really good to start the season, going up against some really good defensive bigs at times as well. So I think he's right up there. He is one of the best we've got in college basketball today, and he's surrounded by a veteran group who has played together. I think that's so important. I know they had the off-court issues. That was one of the new players involved, 2 of the new players involved. But that group that is in the rotation that plays a lot, man, they're locked in. They know where everyone's going to be on the court. Bruce Pearl probably doesn't even have to call plays if he doesn't want to for large portions of the game, and they can get into all of their sets whenever they want. When we come back on the other side, we'll talk a little bit about the Players Era Festival, how that's gone to this point, and any other loose games that come up along the way right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in for the second segment of this Thanksgiving episode of 3 True Values. We're talking about the Players Era Festival, and we'll touch on a couple of the games from the battle for Atlantis as well as we're here and talking about things. We've got the championship. It's set in the Players Era Festival. It will be Alabama against Oregon. I think it'll be a really good matchup. I'd favor Alabama right now just based off of preseason expectations, the depth of the roster, all the things that we've talked about with Alabama in the past. As you know, though, I think Oregon is a solid NCAA tournament caliber team, and a team that really, it's impressive that they're undefeated right now. There's no doubt about it. Jackson Shellstad has not been good to this point, and I think he's a player with real NBA upside on their team. The efficiency has not been there, and I think the more that he can round into form, can get back to the player that he is, the better this Oregon team is going to get. And you talk about this Oregon team, Kwame Evans also not putting up big numbers, and he's doing other things on the court. He just, his presence, I think, is valuable to them when he's out there, but in terms of production, he just has not had it to this point in the season either. So you're talking about two very important players on this team not living up to expectations, and they're still undefeated and in the championship game of a big time tournament. So for Oregon, they first knock off Texas A&M, who has been a roller coaster of a team so far. It's nothing new for that program, but I really just would like to see some consistency there from them moving forward. Texas A&M rebounded with a win against Creighton, who, as I said, is kind of plummeting right now. They just have struggled. I mean, they got blown out by San Diego State, who, again, a team that I like, but is not some world beater team. Creighton, if you're a top 20, top 15 type of team, you expect to go in there and, if not win, at least compete for the entirety of the game. They did not do that in that matchup. But Oregon knocks off San Diego State, and now they are into the championship. I want to shout out Nate Biddle, who has been behind in Fale Dante. He's suffered injuries. He's been kind of tied to the bench. He is a former 5-star player, a guy who has kind of sat and waited his turn at Oregon for a while now. And I really had wondered if it was ever going to happen. He was a guy who, in my mind, was prime candidate for the transfer portal if he wanted to get a fresh start. But clearly he made the right decision to stay. Dana Altman made the right decision to keep him involved and make sure that he knew he was a valuable piece, because he has come out and been extremely important to them early on in the season, provides them with that anchor. The rebounding has been big from him as well. So Oregon exceeding expectations despite some issues along the way. Rutgers played Alabama, as well as taking on Notre Dame. Man, this side of the bracket, how about, the Rutgers Notre Dame matchup ends up being very interesting. Ace Bailey struggled, but Dylan Harper, and 35 points for the Scarlet Knights. And then again, 35 points against Alabama, the first freshman to do that. And I can't remember the exact stat, but it was a long time. But Dylan Harper has looked the part. He is the leader on that Rutgers team. Yes, Ace Bailey is extremely talented. He showed that off a lot more against Alabama. It was really nice to see him have a bounce back performance the way that he did, and really kind of cement that, hey, no, that was an outlier. This is who I am as a basketball player. He's a fluid scorer. We know that about Ace Bailey. He flashed a little bit on the defensive end too, which I liked against Alabama, but I think going up against Mo Diabate is a big challenge for anyone, and he really stepped up to the plate there. Alabama, though, again, it's just that depth. I mentioned Mo Diabate, and you probably think about him and you say, well, how far down is he even on the depth chart? And it's pretty far down, but they can throw whatever they need to at you. If you've got an elite wing scorer, they can throw him out there and say, all right, go have fun trying to score against this guy. Stevenson ends up coming up clutch at the end of the game. Grant Nelson had another big performance. Mark Sears is somebody that we have to stop and talk about here quickly, though. I mentioned last week that it was going to be important to see how Mark Sears responded after he sat out the end of the game. Of course, he asked Nate Oates to sit out, according to the reports and what people said after the game and the conversations that were had. But even then, you're still upset that you're on the bench. You're upset at yourself versus the coach, which is better probably. But when you're in a slump, sometimes getting mad at yourself just makes it worse. And he responded. He came out there. I said it was going to be important to see, how does he respond the next time he comes out? Does he look like he still trusts himself? He definitely still trusts himself. He came out and had a great performance and has continued that. He looks like the player that Mark Sears is supposed to be. And I think he's found his rhythm again out of that slump. And that's big for Alabama, because he's going to be a huge piece of what they do, regardless of what else is going on. Because LeBaron Filan, look, he has emerged. He is a big time point guard for them. but he's not going to have it every night. He's a freshman. He's learning through a lot of these things that are happening. He did not have the best night against Rutgers, but because Mark Sears steps up, well, now you can fill in Phylon wherever you need him. Aiden Holloway can step in when needed. There's a lot more that you can do there on the perimeter with those guards. And we could talk about Alabama's depth all day. We know about it. They're going to face Oregon. We'll talk about that next week. But I would not rule this team out just because they took a loss early in the season for sure against a good Purdue team. When we come back on the other side, we will get you through the game. Excuse me. I knew I was missing something. That's why I was kind of drawing that out there. Do need to touch on the battle for Atlantis, the games that have happened so far. I believe we have more to talk about on next week's show because of the timing of it all here. But Gonzaga loses to West Virginia. And that was a shocking overtime result to me. And West Virginia kind of pulled away at the end. Gonzaga looked like they were rolling early on in the season. And so I was not expecting that type of performance from the Zags. But I mean, West Virginia, they looked pretty good. On the other side of that bracket, Louisville just crushed Indiana. And you want to talk about a hot seat. Mike Woodson, his seat is burning up already in this season. I mean, they got humiliated by Louisville. It easily could have been 40 or 50 points if Pat Kelsey hadn't called off the dogs. I mean, just running up and down the court. Chucky Hepburn, 7 steals in the game. I mean, 7 steals, come on. Like, you're a top 25 team. You cannot allow the opponent to get get 7 steals from one player. I mean, just ridiculous. And then to get blown out the next day. I mean, there's nothing like they're going to drop out of the top 25. Mike Woodson's going to have a lot of things to fix. He's got the talent. I mean, look at that roster. That roster is a top 10 roster. The only reason it wasn't in the top 10 coming into the season is because of the questions that were surrounding the coach. And those have been amplified and are now being spewed across the country right now. There's a lot to get fixed in Bloomington. I hope that he can get it fixed because nothing else. This roster is amazing. And beyond that, how cool it is if that becomes a success story. We talk about this with these kind of players and these coaches who are in a certain situation where you would love for them to succeed. But they got to get it rolling eventually. And it has not happened to this point at Indiana. We'll see if he can get it figured out midway through the year here. Louisville, though, man, I mean, it's hard because you want to like really harp on how bad Indiana was, but Louisville was really good. Their only loss on the season is to Tennessee. They pick up another win on Thanksgiving, and now it's like, well, how good is this Louisville team? I think that they're right knocking on the door of being an NCAA tournament caliber team. They're definitely going to be somewhere around the bubble. I don't know if they'll be on the right side or the wrong side when I publish bracketology here in just about a week. But whichever side of it they're on, they're right there in the picture. And obviously, December is going to be a huge month for them. They play a lot of big games. Just go look at their schedule. I mean, of course, the Kentucky rivalry, but they have got some top 25 matchups, some real quad one opportunity, what will be quad one as of next week, opportunities. They've got a lot to play for here over the next month, and they'll build their resume heading into ACC play, which we know is never easy. Now that we've hit on that, now that we remembered to go through those games, we'll come back on the other side. We'll get you the games of the week and get you out of here on Thanksgiving. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to the last segment here of Three True Values. We'll take you through the games of the week. We've got one less to give you this week because we're recording later on a Thursday. So some of the best games are already over on this Thanksgiving holiday. So we'll start you off on Friday where we've got multiple championship games. So definitely check those out. But one non-conference matchup that's not part of an MTE that I wanted to mention because I think it's a really fun one. Ohio State and Pitt, two teams that are in the NCAA tournament conversation. They're going to be playing against each other. So definitely check that one out on Black Friday if you don't have anything else that you're watching at that time. On Saturday, it's definitely the Players Era Festival Championship game, Alabama versus Oregon. We talked about that one earlier in the show, and how much I like those teams, how much I think we're going to learn from that really good matchup between two teams. On Sunday, not a big slate, but Nebraska and North Florida. North Florida already has some upsets under their belt. They look like a really good mid-major team. Nebraska team trying to get back to the NCAA tournament and pick up that win. Fred Hoiberg's group looks really good so far. I think that they're right on track to be in that conversation as the season unfolds. Then on Monday, again, another light slate. I mean, everybody's coming off. They're traveling back from these different MTEs. But we've got Nevada and Washington State. Why not? Washington State's an interesting team. Quite a few guys from Eastern Washington transferring in there with the coach taking over. And Nevada, look, a Mountain West team that if the Mountain West is going to be good again, if they're going to get that kind of respect that they got last year, it's going to take Nevada pulling into that conversation and being really good along the way. On Tuesday, we pick back up. We got more big games. Ole Miss and Louisville is where we're going to go for the game of the day. I think a chance to see Chris Beard's team against an up and rising Louisville team. This would kind of be a rival for Pat Kelsey. I think they've got some wins under their belt now. If they can kind of back it up with another one outside of this MTE format, I think it would really go a long way for making people think, wow, this team is more than just like on the bubble of the NCAA tournament. They're probably in the field at this point and have a real chance to go like make noise in the ACC as well. And then on Wednesday, the last day before we will speak again, we've got a loaded slate. I mean, block out some time and sit down and watch multiple games. That's my advice. But the game of the day, we're going to go with Auburn against Duke. I think it's going to be really interesting to see that Auburn team, which I praised earlier in the show, go up against this Duke team that has kind of turned into a barometer. I mean, Duke is playing a loaded non-conference schedule to this point and has become this gauging point where we say, okay, well, like, how good is this team? How did they look against Duke? And Duke is going to want to like break through at some point. Those are some competitive freshmen, some guys with real big goals here at Duke. So be interested to see which side can prevail there, because it's a big opportunity for both of those teams to show what they have. We'll talk to you after this set of games about everything going on in college basketball and more. We'll have bracketology coming out soon. The net rankings will be a point of discussion in the next couple weeks as they unveil. So much to look forward to. NBA draft content coming out soon. Just a lot of stuff this time of year. You move from Thanksgiving, you start looking towards Christmas, and it all gets really fun talking about basketball. Thanks for tuning in here on 3 True Values. We'll see you next week.